I wanted to give a little context before I start the presentation. I have been a naturopathic physician for almost 25 years, but the past 7 or 8 years have been kind of windy years for me. My family in 2018, we moved to Barcelona, Spain. And I took a year sabbatical from my practice, turned out to be a 2-year sabbatical. And then when we got back, my son at the time was systematically being swallowed by an illness that he inherited from me, obsessive compulsive disorder. And I decided to take more time away from my practice to accompany him through the treatment of that, which turned out to be a 4-year, a brutal 4-year journey for him. So what I did in that time, rather than practicing, is I wrote a book. I wrote a book about body-centered emotional resilience. And what that means is, in my private practice, I combined mind-body medicine, integrative mental health, and body work. And I wrote a book about how we can sit with hard and challenging emotions through the lens of the body, through the physical experience of emotion. How can we use that to stay with ourselves rather than distract, numb, and avoid those feelings? So we'll start. There's one more piece that I just want to say. So one of my passions, I guess you could say, is talking about mind-body concepts and ideas in a very accessible and relatable way. And so I use terms, this probably should have been called somatic emotional resilience, right? But when confronted with two terms, I sometimes choose the term that feels a little bit more relatable and accessible to a wider audience. I know I'm speaking at a professional conference, but you'll see that throughout my presentation. So what does body-centered mean? What does somatic mean? It means how we live and exist in our bodies. Are we mindful of our bodies as we go about our day? Are we present to the feelings and sensations in our bodies? Body-centered therapies and practices, you all know them: Tai Chi, yoga, exercise, body work, touch, meditation, breath work, energy medicine, and more, much more. So what is resilience? Certainly a hot topic today. When we read about our children and adolescents, the mental health of our children and adolescents, we talk a lot about resilience, but it's an important aspect of our adult life as well. The ability to cope with, adapt, and recover from stressful or adverse events. What makes us resilient? So I'm sure you all have heard of the growth mindset. I told you we lived in Spain for a couple years. My kids went to an international school there. And their curriculum was based upon the growth mindset. So instead of kind of going into a class and being expected to get an A and, excel, and they were expected to take risks and make mistakes and fail and learn from that. Bounce back ability, how we adapt to stressors and recover from setbacks. Positive outlook makes us resilient. Maintaining a hopeful and optimistic attitude. Emotional intelligence and regulation. So I'll talk a little bit about this later. Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, brought this idea to a wider audience. but our ability to effectively manage and respond to emotional experiences. And tolerating hard emotions. I don't know, on my slide that was highlighted, but that's what we're going to look at today from a body-centered perspective, is how can we begin to tolerate the hard stuff that we're feeling, our challenging feelings, the ability to tolerate and the willingness to feel tough emotions. So we live in a modern day conundrum. Thinking versus feeling, what does that mean? Well, we spend a lot of times in our heads and not that much time living in our bodies, right? We spend the majority of our days sitting in front of a computer, absorbed in our thoughts, absorbed in our cognitive and intellectual pursuits. And we prioritize cognition, intellect, thinking, while our bodies are often relegated to exercise and recreation. We identify with our thoughts, right? We identify with that part of ourselves. That's who we are. We see our emotional experiences through a cognitive lens. I am sad because. I am sad because. I am happy because. We tend to talk about our emotions more than actually feeling them. Throughout this, sorry, I was just looking at the time and I don't, okay. Throughout this presentation, we're going to take a few body breaks. So the idea is to get us out of our heads, out of our thoughts, and into our bodies. So let's just take a moment, stop and pause, and bring our awareness to our body. You can keep your eyes open or keep them closed. And just take a moment and put both feet on the ground. Feel if your feet are soft, tense, or resting on the ground. Are your toes curled or relaxed? Take a moment and feel your feet. That's all. Feel your feet. So emotional intelligence, we'll look at what that means. Motivation, internal drive, commitment, and optimism. Social skills, our ability to communicate, lead, influence, connect, and build relationships through being tuned into the emotions of others. Empathy, recognizing challenges, motivations, and aspirations of others. Self-awareness, recognizing your own emotions, as well as your strengths and weaknesses. And self-regulation, managing emotions and responses, choosing expression over suppression, and tolerating hard feelings. So that was just some definitions, right? Let's just talk about how emotions are perceived in our world often. The emotional brain is considered the inferior part of ourselves, right? The inferior part of our brains. Emotions are something to be managed, regulated, and kept in check, right? Isn't that what we hear? Emotions are not to be trusted. We cannot be clear or level-headed when we are emotional. If we think about the societal messages that we hear from childhood on, boys don't cry, hold it together, pull yourself together, put on a brave face, grin and bear it, grow thicker skin, push it under the rug, right? So we're taught from childhood on to to sort of hold our emotions back, hold them in, swallow, sit on, stuff emotions. I talk about when I was a kid, my parents, while they were really loving people, they had an interesting idea about raising kids. They believed that young people shouldn't have to be exposed to hard stuff, hard topics, hard conversations, hard feelings. And as a result, they didn't talk about that kind of stuff. They didn't show me hard conversations. They didn't show me confrontation. They didn't talk about their hard feelings. And I was a big feeler. I feel things very strongly in my body. And growing up, I didn't know what to do with that, with all that feeling. And as a result, became pretty good at numbing myself from my feelings. So emotions are experienced in three main ways. I put the why, how, where, and what here because I do speak with kids about emotions, and I use the why, how, where, and what to communicate to them sort of the idea of how we feel emotions in our bodies. So the why is the cognitive aspect, how we cognitively experience our emotions, right? The why am I sad? Why am I mad? This is our intellectual, analytical experience where we talk about and we create narratives for our feelings. We have thoughts about our emotions and analyze and understand the emotion. The how. How is the expressive and the behavioral aspect. This is our expression, outlet, and release of emotion. Our screams, our tears, our punches, our smiles, and our hugs. Expression of emotion is not limited to physical acts. We can express emotion through art, music, writing, yoga, dance, and so many other outlets. So the where and what is what I'm interested in. Our body's experience of emotion. So when we open a physiology book, we read about a racing heart, sweating, changes in respiration, right? Those are the most common attributes associated with emotion. However, our emotional experience is much richer and more complex. So it includes our butterflies in the stomach, nervousness, our head is going to explode rage, our warmth of contentment throughout our body, and our aching and breaking heart of grief. The body's experience of emotion. So emotion is nonverbal, and it's preverbal. And we experience emotion in our body. We can analyze emotion, we can talk about it, we can think about it, we can create narratives and stories around it. But the body is where we feel it. The body is where we feel our grief and our love and our wonder and our pain, our emotional pain. I love looking at the language that we use because when I talk about the emotional experience of the physical experience of emotion, sometimes I'll get the response, well, I don't know, like that's not really a thing. But if you look at the words that we use, if you look at the phrases that we use, hot-headed, cool-headed, foaming at the mouth, lump in my throat, choked up, pain in the neck, getting something off my chest. I don't have to read them all, but my blood runs cold, weak in the knees, sinking feeling, bent out of shape, racked with pain on pins and needles. It really is a thing, right? It really is something that is real based on the words that we use, right? Based on the words that we use, we feel our emotion strongly and profoundly in our bodies. So this is just a bell curve, right? The curve of tolerating emotions. This is not the window of tolerance. It's not the Kubler-Ross change curve. When I went through treatment, my son saw about, 8 or 9 doctors in those 4 years. Every single one of them showed him this curve, right? Psychologists use this, therapists use this as a way to explain to patients and clients how to last, how to make it through their stress and anxiety. Okay, so my son, who his brain was telling him that he needed to repeat activities over and over and over again until he got a feeling within himself that he had done it right. And that feeling was, it always moved the goalpost, right? Like sometimes it might be 5 times, sometimes it was 30, sometimes it was 50. But he was told that if he disengaged from his ritual, that he would have to withstand the discomfort of that through this curve, right? So up, it's going to peak at some point. Your anxiety, your discomfort peaks, and then it will dissipate. I don't know, I put it in the references. I don't know if you all have heard Jill Bolt Taylor's, she's a neuroscientist. She wrote a book called Whole Brain Living and My Stroke of Insight. But she talks about how emotions last about 90 seconds in the body, right? So that this wave of emotion, whether that could be happiness, a wave of happiness, it could be a wave of sadness, it could be a wave of embarrassment, right? Rejection, wonder, awe, happiness, 90 seconds. And when an emotion lasts longer than 90 seconds, this is based on her research, it's because we think about it again. We think about the narrative again, right? We think about words and what's going on and the story, right? So that the actual physiological wave of our emotions lasts about 90 seconds. So I just wanted you to see how sort of traditional therapists and psychologists talk about, and I'm sure you've heard the term, right? You have to sit with your discomfort, right? You have to sit with your anxiety. This is what they're talking about. So what's another word for a bell curve? Another word for a bell curve?
Normal distribution.
Yeah. I was thinking wave, but yeah, a wave. Emotional resilience is riding the wave of emotion. So that's the message today, right? Emotional resilience is our ability to ride the waves of our emotions, whether they feel good or neutral or yucky or awful or excruciating or wonderful. Resilience means that we ride their wave. We tolerate that. Our ability to tolerate difficult emotions and our willingness to feel our many emotions, right? You know, I often say if we're not willing to take in our good moments, right? Like even, I'm going to talk a little bit about distraction and numbing and avoiding feeling. But if we have a hard time taking in our good feelings, our hard feelings don't stand a chance, right? Our hard feelings don't stand a chance. So this idea of riding the wave of emotion it's an important thing to take in, and I often talk to people about starting with less threatening emotions and good, and emotions that feel good. And are you able to pause, stop, and take in that feeling and let it become something in your body and move through it? So what's the opposite of riding a wave of emotion? We have this woman here running away from, right? So running away from an emotion, pushing away an emotion, swallowing, stuffing down emotions. And we do this through many behaviors. We do it through avoiding, numbing, and distracting behaviors. And these behaviors can run the gamut from incidental to problematic to pathological. So what are the ways we avoid our emotion? Right, well, we all know and our patients, right? We can numb using food, alcohol, prescription, recreational drugs. The next category is a really biggie. It's a presentation in and of itself. The opportunity for us to distract ourselves today is so prevalent. I mean, if we just think about this, right? Like, you wonder how many times has a feeling come into your body, a feeling of insecurity, maybe, of rejection, embarrassment, shame, guilt, frustration, or satisfaction, accomplishment, gratitude. And instead of staying with that feeling, you check your email, right? Or you check a text, or you check the news, or you scroll through social media. And I want you to know that when I say this, I'm not like, I have an enormous amount of empathy and compassion for the predicament that we find ourselves in. I'm not passing judgment in any way. I'm just saying that it's something that we need to be thoughtful and mindful of, and something to bring our attention to. I have kids in high school. I see, we depend so much on these mechanisms of distraction. We will not be able to sit with ourselves. We are going to have generation after generation of people that don't know how to sit with hard stuff. Retreating. So this may be a less common way that people think about avoiding our emotions. Again, I told you I was a big feeler as a kid and as an adolescent, and I'm also an introvert. And so it was really easy for me to retreat into my life, into my bedroom as a child, into my apartment as a young adult. I didn't want to feel messy, complicated feelings. I didn't want to feel or engage in messy, complicated relationships. And as a result, I was a big retreater as well as a number. So just to be aware that this is a way that we can stay away from hard, messy stuff. And protecting. So this is a body-centered piece. This is what we do. We can tense our muscles and hold our breath to keep emotions down in our body. We can tense our neck, our throats, our jaw to keep emotion down, to not feel it. So that's also something to just be aware of, is that our avoiding behaviors can show up as muscular tension in our bodies. Okay, so I want to do another body break. Again, you can keep your eyes open or closed. We're going to stop and pause and bring our awareness to the body. So we'll take a minute. Just listen to the guidance. Release the tension in your jaw. Soften your neck and shoulders. And let your pelvis and rib cage widen to support you. Resist the urge to analyze and to question how to do this the right way. There is no right way. There is only your way. Release the tension in your jaw. Soften your neck and shoulders. And let your pelvis and rib cage widen to support you. Quiet your mind and simply let your body respond to the guidance. That's all. So you can come back sort of into the room. So how can we begin to use mind-body techniques, body-centered and mindfulness concepts to help us ride the wave of our emotions? So I'm going to talk specifically about 4 areas, and we're going to look at each one and just begin to understand it and begin to play with it. Present moment awareness, quieting the mind and the awareness of felt experience. So this is a big piece again for what is our inner experience of our bodies. I shared with you that my son and I have OCD. There were moments in my life where I was desperate to figure out who I was apart from the busyness in my head, the rumination and the intrusive thoughts. And I found some answers by going away from the mind, by beginning to quiet the mind and exploring who I was apart from that mental soundtrack that was really controlling my life. So we're going to talk about that. Non-judgmental attitude and compassion, so important, and conscious acceptance. So we're going to look at each one of these things. So I'm sure, I don't know, maybe people have read Eckhart Tolle's book, right, The Power of Now. I'm sure you're familiar with that. There's lots of books on the present moment. It's, again, a hot topic today. I love this picture, right, of this woman. I just love it so much because I use imagery in my practice. Imagery that has us really begin to see the future as something that's in front of us, the past as something that's behind us. I just love her, and she's so open, right, to the moment that we're in, right? So that the present moment is here. The present moment is our emotions. If we are in an emotional state, the present moment is that, right? When patients come in, I do body work with my patients, but when they come in, we work with what we have. And that means if somebody comes in with, if they come in rattled from a conversation or something that happened, we work with the rattledness. If somebody comes in anxious and frustrated, that's what we work with. If somebody comes in happy and joyful and, had a moment of success, that's what we work with. But it's really important to understand that the present moment it's just the moment that we're in And we're going to then, another moment will wash upon us, right? But that to really begin to understand that the past is behind us, right? And the future is in front of us. And what is real is this very moment. This very moment. Staying with the now, where you are now. Accepting and opening to this very moment. That's where we start. Quiet the mind. Awareness of felt experience. So another thing that I like to do when I work with folks or when I teach and talk about mind-body medicine and meditation and mindfulness is to have people kind of throw their preconceived notions of these concepts out the window. Because oftentimes people will come in and they'll believe that really the goal of meditation is either to have no thoughts whatsoever or to reach this place of Zen, right? Or some kind of, magical place of peace and contentment. And while I honor those goals, I honor that. That's really not what it's all about. What it's all about is being with your present moment and whatever that might be. And so sometimes these preconceived notions of mind-body stuff, of meditation, keeps people at a distance from it. And that's why I love to talk about these concepts, because I try to make them relatable and friendly and approachable. When I was, I have some former students in the room, they might remember this. When I was little in elementary school, I was over a friend's house and we were playing hide and seek. And I grew up in Nantucket, so there was this old house, 3 floors, and I'm running up to the attic because I was convinced that she was hiding in the attic. And I open the door and her mom is meditating. Okay, this is in the 70s. Cross-legged, naked, from the her top naked, meditating. I was horrified. I closed the door and ran away. But so that was my idea of what meditation was. And so I grew up as an adolescent and a young person thinking, meditation is so not for me. That's not me. I'm not going to sit naked in a room. And so I say that because we all have these preconceived ideas of what things are. And I like to throw them out the window if possible. And I also like why I combined quieting the mind with awareness of felt experiences. Sometimes it's hard, a lot of times it's hard to quiet our thoughts and to just notice them and to let them pass and to not attach. So it's nice to have something to hang our hat on. And what I mean by that is as we're noticing our thoughts, not attaching to them, we can bring our awareness to something in the body. And that kind of gives us something to do, right? We're in Western culture, we kind of need to do things, even though this has nothing to do with doing. Noticing our physical experience, noticing what's going on in our body is actually very helpful. It gives us a place to go. So we can move away from our mind, away from the thoughts, the cycling thoughts, and towards something very real, very authentic. It's our body, our feelings, our breath. So I love that. I love to combine those two for people. So your focus gently shifts from the mental chatter to the present moment experience of your body. Breath, sensations, temperature, muscular tension, softening, ease, discomfort, and your emotions. So the awareness of felt experience, I just want to talk a little bit about this because this is in my book, and what I talk about is how can we begin to realize or just begin to notice that our emotions have a discernible, a tangible experience in our bodies, right? So that for some of us, and not everybody, but some of us are very strong, big feelers. And that our feelings of sadness and anger, rage, frustration, impatience can actually have a location within our body. It can have a density, an intensity, a shape, right? And so that if we can begin to give ourselves permission to find those feelings, we become more familiar and maybe even make friends with some of our tough feelings, right? If they can come into our body, if we know what they feel like, maybe we expect them sometimes, right? Or maybe they come in and we don't. But if we can begin to be familiar and maybe even give them a vocabulary, we can talk about, yeah, I feel my anxiety underneath my sternum and it feels like hard bubbles pressing forward against my sternum. I'm giving my physical inner experience a voice. I think that's big stuff. And we'll see that in one or two of my case studies. We'll look at that. So non-judgmental attitude, compassion. So we have this voice that sits, for some of us it sits on our shoulder, for some of us it sits back here, for some of us it sits here, but it's a voice and it comments freely all the time and openly about what we're doing, right? And I call that the inner critic. So our inner critic loves to talk to us and loves to derail any situation, right? It can derail because we think, oh my gosh, we hear the voice of what we're doing wrong. So this is where in my practice I like to begin to develop, begin to nurture, begin to foster something that I call the neutral observer. And this has many different names. In mind-body medicine, I just like the neutral observer. And the neutral observer is very different than the inner critic, okay? It is a compassionate and non-judgmental lens that we look at ourselves through. But I'll tell you, it takes practice. It takes persistence to build within us, to begin to look at our behaviors and our emotions, our sensations, our feelings through this lens, resisting the urge to attaching words and stories and narratives, but to just simply observe the feeling, as opposed to going up into the mind and trying to make sense of it. Looking through a lens of neutral observation rather than through the lens of criticism and judgment. Neutrality is it's an important piece to how we live and think and exist. To begin to, again, make friends and open up to feelings within us, if we can approach those feelings without judgment, without trying to label them as good, bad, positive, or negative. So conscious acceptance. The process of allowing thoughts, feelings, and experiences to be as they are without judging them, trying to change them, or trying to resist them. Conscious acceptance kind of wraps up all the things that we've talked about into one basket. I like to use some imagery when I'm talking about conscious acceptance. And it's funny because the image that I use is not going to actually relate, like adolescents, kids today aren't going to be able to relate to it because we no longer have, in cars, I've noticed, we no longer have the parking brakes. You remember the I don't know, maybe they still are, but the parking brake that you have to like, and pull on. But I like to use that image with my older patients because it's a physical experience. You can actually like you can feel that in your body, pulling up the parking brake. And I use that to demonstrate what the tension, the work, the effort in our body when we get in the way of the flow of life, right? Like when we get in the way of what's going on with us. And if we pull that parking brake, there's an enormous amount of effort rather than just to go with the flow or to go with the wave. And the foil to that is the idea of riding a wave, right? To just let go of any resistance that you might have and to let a wave carry you wherever that may be, right? And can we begin to trust to be carried and to not know where we might end up. That's a leap of faith, right? That's a leap of faith to trust that we will be carried. But it's a cool concept. Okay, I need to be conscious of the time. So this is just a recap. I'm going to go through this quickly because I want to get to some other stuff. But so body-centered emotional resilience, present moment awareness of the experience in our body, quieting the mind, awareness of felt experience, non-judgmental attitude, compassion, and conscious acceptance. Let go of any resistance to the feeling and welcome it into your body, riding the feeling until it shifts or dissipates. So the next slide is what are the benefits of sitting with and tolerating difficult emotions? This is another question that I get when I talk about this topic. I talk about the book. My book is people will say, well, do we really have to do that, right? Like that's really hard work. Why do I need to sit with a hard feeling? Like, what's the point? Well, there's a lot of points. And, the first one is that if we live our life daunted by hard feelings, right? Like I don't want to feel insecure. I don't want to feel rejected. I don't want to feel embarrassed. I don't want to feel failure. If we live our life daunted by these feelings, then we may not take risks, right? We may not jump into a new friendship. We may not jump into a new relationship. We may not jump into an adventure and take a new job. We might play it safe, right? So when we become more friendly with our emotions and when we can tolerate and know that we can ride the wave of hard stuff and it dissipates and we don't have to reach for our phones or we don't have to reach for a candy bar, right? Or we don't have to kind of run in the opposite direction. We can feel those feelings. We live life differently. And the taking responsibility for feelings is another piece. So our feelings can hold us hostage, and our hard feelings can hold the people that we love hostage. And what I mean by that is that if we get in the habit of swallowing and sitting and stuffing down our emotions, they come back up, right? We know that. Intuitively, we know that. If we hold back a feeling, we may do it, we might be successful for a while, right? But it comes back up. And who does it come back up at? Oftentimes it's the people that we love, right? It's the people that we love. And so the more that we can own our feelings, process them, feel them, ride them, the less likely we are of stuffing them down and having them come back up on the people that we love. I just want to do one more body break. So you can, again, leave your eyes open or closed. Listening to and experiencing this lecture, this presentation, may have brought up some feelings in your body. Maybe validation, maybe anxiety, perhaps fear or acceptance, frustration, restlessness, contentment, maybe boredom. Take a moment and bring your awareness inward to your chest and your gut. Your chest and your gut. Are there any feelings or sensations brewing in your chest and or your gut? Maybe there are, maybe not. Resist judging or trying to manufacture a feeling. Just open up to whatever the moment is. Simply notice what you're feeling. Maybe the feeling has a location. Maybe the feeling has a density, a shape, a color, an image. Don't judge, just notice. Okay. So I just want to present two cases to just show how I use this in my practice. The first case, and again, I should say again that I work in conjunction oftentimes with therapists and psychologists, so they send patients to me. Penny was sent to me by her psychologist. She had a history of, she was 25 years old. She had a history of both anorexia and self-harm. And her psychologist sent her to me because she knew that Penny was a big feeler. She was somatic. And she wanted her to begin to understand that part of herself, wanted to begin to give herself permission to feel and maybe even a vocabulary for those feelings. Penny had extensive psychotherapy and a transformative few months in an eating disorder program. So she came to me, she was ripe for body work, and we went to the table and we begin to explore these aspects of present moment. Like, what are you feeling? What are you experiencing? Let's stay with those feelings. Let's welcome them. Let's invite feelings into our bodies. On one of her sessions, she came in with a feeling of, I think it was rejection. I don't know. This is the same, yeah. She was feeling rejected based on a situation with her boss. She got on the table and she began to feel like, I know this feeling, this is a familiar feeling in my body. She was able to tell me where it was, what it felt like. And what was interesting is she began to connect it. This is a familiar feeling. I felt it in high school. This idea of being rejected. I had friends, she told me, I had friends that really weren't friends. I had friends that were really cruel to me. And then what she said after that, like, kind of blew me away. I paraphrased it here. Talking about her pain as an adolescent. I never realized it before, but cutting was my way of controlling when I felt pain. I didn't want to feel the cruelty of my friends. I felt pain on my own terms. So if we think about that, right, she was somebody who felt things very strongly in her body, but had never really been given, even though she had been in an enormous amount of psychotherapy in her life, she had never really been given permission to, or even just, the idea of that feelings are within us and we don't want to feel them. And we actually sometimes want to run away from them. And she wanted to control when she felt pain. She didn't want them but just popping up. She didn't want feelings of rejection just popping up, so she created her own pain. So again, this is really big stuff, and it piggybacks, obviously, with therapy, which is why I work with a lot of therapists and psychologists, because people can begin to realize that their strong feelings within themselves are playing out in their lives in big ways, and playing out in how they avoid and push away feelings, how they numb themselves, how they distract themselves. So one more study before we end. We have a few more minutes left. David. So because of my son's OCD, because of my own OCD, I have become, in the past few years, more involved with the OCD community at large. And I was speaking at a sort of conference/camp over the summer about sitting with the discomfort of emotion and sitting with the discomfort, again, like I said of my son, sitting with the discomfort of people not engaging in their rituals and looking at it through the lens of the body. And I had a therapist come up. I'm not seeing patients right now, but she came up to me and said, I have a patient, I know that he is a big feeler, and he's struggling, he's not moving anywhere, he's treatment resistant. And I think that this body-centered piece could be important. Can I fold you into his therapy? So I did some work with the therapist, and I did some work with David. And it's interesting because David has the same OCD as my son, the just right OCD, which means that he might need to, for my son, it was like he needed to cross over a threshold of a door. And his mind would tell him, well, sometimes, I don't know, this isn't right, and I have to come back and do it again. And it was there wasn't a narrative in his head. It was a physical experience. And he had to do it that many times until he was allowed to move forward, right, in his mind. Similar things were happening with David. Again, feelings, just right. There wasn't narrative. There weren't words. There weren't stories. And taking that a step further, if you remember that curve, so in treatment for OCD, it's called ERP, exposure and response prevention. They basically, this is egregiously oversimplifying it, but they say, just don't engage in the behavior. Either don't step or just, you have to walk through that door. Walking through that door for my son was like climbing the highest mountain. I mean, that's how unbearable it is to talk back to your OCD, right? And to not do what your OCD is telling you need to do. So that wave, again, that bell wave of anxiety, he couldn't get through it. Again, David was the same way. And so I worked with David to begin to just give himself permission and to give himself an awareness and a vocabulary of what that anxiety for him felt like, right? So the anxiety that he's feeling as he's being told that he has to ignore what his OCD, what his mind is telling him, that anxiety for him was a very physical experience, right? It was in his gut. I remember he told me it was in his gut and his throat, and it was unbearable. But as he got to know that physical sensation, of anxiety for him, it actually gave him something to realize, oh, so that's what my doctor's telling me. That's what I need to sit with. It's not just a sort of abstract idea, sitting with your anxiety. Sitting with your anxiety, sitting with your discomfort can be really abstract for people. No, that's what my doctor's telling me, to stay with this feeling in my gut and this feeling in my throat. And it gave him something to stay with, to ride the wave. And what happens in OCD is the more that you can ride the wave, the quieter OCD becomes, right? So the more that you talk back to it or ignore it or say no to it, the quieter it becomes. And so he was actually able to overcome that voice, to talk back to it, to not listen to it, to say no to it, because he was able to outlast his wave of discomfort. I don't know if that makes sense. OCD is tricky, but I hope that makes sense.